The day my parents gave me away started with pancakes. I remember that because my mother only made pancakes when something important was happening. The smell drifted through our small house in Tulsa, Oklahoma, waking me before my alarm. For a moment, I thought maybe she remembered it was the day of my science fair presentation. Maybe things were finally changing. I was 12 years old, and at that age, hope had a way of surviving longer than it should. When I walked into the kitchen, my older brother Derek was already sitting at the table. My father was smiling. That alone should have warned me. Dad rarely smiled at breakfast. "Morning, champ," he said to Derek. "Not me." "Never me." Derek grinned. "Morning." I sat quietly in my usual chair. Nobody looked at me. Mom placed a plate of pancakes in front of Derek first, then Dad, then herself. I waited. Finally, she slid a smaller plate toward me without meeting my eyes. The pancakes were cold. I remember staring at them while everyone talked about Derek's upcoming academic competition. Derek was the smart one, the gifted one, the future doctor. The future success story. I was simply Noah, the kid who struggled with math, the kid who read slowly, the kid teachers constantly compared to his brother. For years, I believed something was wrong with me. Not because teachers said it, because my parents did. Every chance they got. "You need to be more like Derek. Why can't you focus? Your brother understands things instantly." Honestly, Noah, sometimes I wonder what goes on inside your head. I stopped raising my hand in school, stopped asking questions, stopped trying, because every mistake became proof. Proof that I wasn't enough. That morning felt strange, too quiet, too organized. Like everyone knew something I didn't. After breakfast, Mom told me to skip school. That had never happened before. "Get dressed," she said. "We need to go somewhere." "Where?" "You'll find out." Her voice sounded flat, almost rehearsed. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Something cold settled in my stomach. An hour later, we pulled into a parking lot outside a law office. I stared through the window. "What are we doing here?" Nobody answered. Dad parked, turned off the engine. The silence felt heavier than anything he'd ever yelled at me. Then Mom spoke. "Just listen today, okay?" The words made no sense. Inside, everything smelled like paper and coffee. An older woman led us into a conference room. A man in a gray suit sat at the table, and beside him sat my Uncle Ray, the only person in my family who actually talked to me. My father's younger brother. Ray never treated me differently. When everyone else praised Derek, Ray asked me about my drawings. When everyone else criticized me, Ray listened. Seeing him there made me relax slightly until I noticed how serious he looked. "Noah," he said softly. "Come sit next to me." My parents sat across the table. The lawyer opened a folder. I still remember the sound of those papers. The slow shuffle, the turning pages, the way my mother's hands shook, then the lawyer smiled, the fake kind. "Today we're discussing a guardianship transfer." I blinked. "A what?" The adults continued talking. Words flew around the room: temporary custody, legal guardian, educational opportunities, best interests. I understood almost none of it until I heard my name and Uncle Ray's. Then everything clicked at once. I looked at my parents. What does that mean? Nobody answered immediately. My heartbeat started pounding. What does that mean? My mother inhaled. "You're going to live with your uncle." The room suddenly felt smaller. I laughed, because it had to be a joke. Nobody laughed back. I looked at Dad. "How long?" His eyes stayed on the table. For good. The air vanished from my lungs. I remember gripping the chair, hard, like I might fall. "What?" Mom leaned forward. "This is what's best." "No." "Noah, no." The word came out louder. People in the hallway probably heard it. I didn't care. I looked at Uncle Ray. He looked devastated. Not excited, not relieved, devastated, and that terrified me. Why? Nobody answered. Why? My voice cracked. Dad finally spoke. The words changed my life. We've done everything we can. I stared. What? You struggle in school. I couldn't breathe. You need different guidance. What does that mean? Then Mom said the sentence I still hear sometimes when I wake up at night. You're just not like Derek. Silence. Complete silence. I felt every eye in the room watching me, waiting, judging, evaluating, like I was a problem being discussed. Not a child, my mother continued. We think Ray can give you the attention you need. Attention. That wasn't what she meant. We all knew it. Dad finally said it. The truth. The thing they had probably discussed for months. You're not academically gifted. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Even he knew this was wrong. Dad continued anyway. Derek has opportunities. I stared at him. So I'm leaving because I'm dumb? Nobody answered. That was answer enough. My chest hurt, my throat burned, and suddenly, I understood every late-night conversation that stopped when I entered the room. Every look, every comparison, every disappointment. They had already made their decision. Long ago. I was simply the last person to find out. I looked at Uncle Ray. His jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might flip the table over. Instead, he calmly pushed a glass of water toward me. You're not dumb. My father laughed quietly. That hurt almost as much. Uncle Ray turned toward him. The room instantly became colder. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Dad looked away. For the first time in my life, someone had defended me, and it wasn't my parents. The paperwork was signed 2 hours later. I don't remember much after that, only fragments. A pen scratching paper, my mother's signature, my father's signature, the lawyer talking, the sound of traffic outside, and one question repeating in my head. If I wasn't their son anymore, what exactly was I? That evening, Uncle Ray loaded my suitcase into his truck. One suitcase. 12 years of life reduced to one suitcase. Neither parent hugged me. Mom stood on the porch with crossed arms. Dad stayed inside. Watching through the window, I kept waiting for someone to stop this, to say it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything. Nothing happened. Uncle Ray opened the passenger door. I climbed in. The truck started. We pulled away. I looked back one final time. My mother turned and walked inside before we reached the end of the driveway. But just as the house disappeared from view, I noticed something strange. A figure standing behind the second-floor curtain. Derek. Watching. Not smiling. Not celebrating. Just staring. And right before the house vanished completely, he pressed something against the glass. A piece of paper. A note. Then the curtain closed. I wouldn't discover what that note said until 15 years later. And when I finally did, everything I believed about that day would change. The drive to my Uncle Ray's house took a little over 3 hours. Neither of us spoke much. The only sounds were the tires humming against the highway and an old country station playing softly through the truck speakers. Every few miles, Uncle Ray glanced at me. Not because he expected me to talk, just to make sure I was still there. I stared out the window until the city disappeared behind us. I kept expecting my parents to call, to realize they'd made a mistake, to tell us to come back. My backpack sat on my lap the entire trip. Inside was my science fair project, a model bridge I'd spent 2 weeks building. Nobody had ever seen it, not even my parents. It suddenly felt stupid to have brought it. About an hour into the drive, Uncle Ray reached into the cooler between the seats. You hungry? I shook my head. He nodded once. Me neither. 10 minutes later, he pulled into a gas station anyway. I've learned something about bad days, he said as he climbed out. They're easier with ice cream. I almost smiled. Almost. He came back carrying 2 chocolate ice cream bars. He handed me one without saying another word. No speech, no lecture, no pretending everything was okay. We ate in silence. It was the first quiet moment I'd ever shared with an adult that didn't feel uncomfortable. Uncle Ray lived outside a small town in Missouri. His house wasn't fancy. It was an old white farmhouse with a wide porch, a red barn, and fields that stretched farther than I'd ever seen. There were chickens wandering across the yard. A golden retriever came sprinting toward the truck, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. "That's Scout," Uncle Ray said. "He thinks everyone is his best friend." Scout jumped against my legs, licking my hands. I laughed before I realized I was laughing. It felt strange, like using muscles I'd forgotten existed. Inside, the house smelled like fresh bread and wood smoke. Family pictures covered the walls. Not expensive portraits, real moments, fishing trips, camping, birthdays. My grandparents when they were young. Then I noticed something unexpected. There was already a framed picture of me. It had been taken 3 years earlier at a family barbecue. I was sitting under a tree sketching while everyone else played volleyball. Nobody at my house had ever displayed a picture of just me. "You kept that?" I asked quietly. Uncle Ray looked at the photo. "Of course. Why?" He looked confused. "Because you're my nephew." He said it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My throat tightened. Nobody had ever answered that question so simply. After dinner, he showed me my room. Blue walls, a bookshelf, a desk by the window, fresh sheets. On the bed sat a wrapped package. "What's this?" "A late birthday gift. My birthday was 4 months ago." "I know." I carefully opened the paper. Inside was a professional sketchbook. The expensive kind I'd only seen behind glass at the art store, along with a full set of graphite pencils. I couldn't speak. "I noticed your old notebook was almost full." "You noticed?" "You draw every time you're nervous." I stared at him. My own parents had never noticed that. Or maybe they had. Maybe they just didn't care. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house reminded me I wasn't home. Around midnight I heard footsteps, a gentle knock. "You awake?" "Yeah." The door opened halfway. Uncle Ray held 2 mugs. "Hot chocolate." He sat in the desk chair while I held the warm mug between my hands. For several minutes we just listened to the rain hitting the roof. Finally he asked, "Do you want to know why I agreed to this?" I nodded. He rubbed his hands together. "I actually didn't." I frowned. "What?" "I fought it." "You did?" "They called me 6 weeks ago." My stomach sank. 6 weeks. That meant my parents had planned this for over a month. They said they couldn't handle you anymore. I looked down. They were wrong. They said I wasn't smart. He leaned forward. "No." His voice was calm. "They said your grades proved it." I waited. Then he reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. Folded carefully inside was a piece of paper. "I asked your school for something before I agreed." He handed it to me. It wasn't a report card. It was an evaluation from the school counselor. Across the top, someone had highlighted one sentence. I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means someone at your school believed there was another explanation." "I don't understand." "It means struggling doesn't automatically mean you're not intelligent." I read the paper again, then again. At the bottom was another handwritten note. Parents declined further evaluation. I looked up. "What does that mean?" Uncle Ray sighed. "It means the school wanted to test you. And your parents refused." The room went completely still. "They refused?" He nodded. "They signed paperwork saying you didn't need additional testing." I couldn't process it. "Why?" "I don't know. But if they thought I was dumb." He finished my sentence. "Why wouldn't they want to find out if they were wrong?" "Exactly." That question echoed through my mind, because none of it made sense. If they truly believed they were helping me, why reject the one thing that might have explained why I struggled? Uncle Ray stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Noah." "Yeah?" "Never confuse someone's opinion of you with the truth." The bedroom door clicked shut. I stared at the counselor's report for almost an hour. The handwriting at the bottom caught my attention again. There was something else, almost hidden beneath the school stamp. A second signature, not from the counselor, not from the principal. Someone had written only 2 words. There was a phone number beneath it. The paper was 15 years old. But suddenly I couldn't stop wondering. Who had wanted to talk to me so badly? I didn't call the number. Not that night. At 12 years old, I barely understood what a learning disability assessment was, much less why someone had wanted me to have one. The paper stayed inside the front pocket of my sketchbook. For years. I carried it everywhere without really knowing why. Maybe because it was the first piece of paper that suggested I wasn't broken. Life with Uncle Ray settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar. Not because it was exciting, because it was peaceful. Nobody timed how long I took to finish homework. Nobody compared my grades to anyone else's. Nobody sighed when I asked a question. The first Monday after I moved in, Uncle Ray drove me to my new middle school. As we pulled into the parking lot, my stomach twisted. What if they think I'm stupid too? He turned off the engine but didn't get out. Instead, he looked straight at me. You know what happens if someone thinks you're stupid? I shrugged. They're responsible for proving it. I frowned. What if they can? He smiled. Then you learn something. And if they can't? Then they learned something. It sounded simple, maybe too simple. But somehow it helped. The school counselor greeted us with a warm smile. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez. She'd already read the transfer paperwork. I heard you like drawing. I blinked. Yeah, we have an art club after school. Nobody had ever introduced themselves by asking what I liked before. They usually asked about my grades, or why I'd transferred, or whether my brother was as smart as everyone said. Mrs. Alvarez didn't ask any of those questions. She simply handed me a map of the school. If you get lost, she said, find somebody wearing one of these. She pointed to the student ambassador's blue lanyards. No one's expected to figure everything out on the first day. I nodded. That sentence stayed with me. No one had ever said that to me before. The first few weeks weren't easy. I still struggled in math. Reading out loud still made my palms sweat. I still mixed up numbers if I was nervous. Old habits don't disappear just because your address changes. But something else changed. When I got an answer wrong, teachers asked me how I reached it, instead of telling me I was wrong immediately. Sometimes I had reached the correct conclusion using a completely different method. Mr. Patel, my science teacher, noticed it first. One afternoon, he stopped me after class. Noah. I froze. Had I done something? He held up my worksheet. You skipped every formula. I looked down. I know. So how did you get the answers? I pointed to a diagram I'd drawn in the margin. I imagined how everything moved. He stared at the page for nearly 30 seconds. Then he laughed. Not a mean laugh, a surprised one. I've been teaching for 19 years. He tapped the paper. Nobody has ever solved this problem that way. My face burned. I'm sorry. For what? I did it wrong. He shook his head. You did it differently. There is a difference. That evening, Mr. Patel called Uncle Ray. I assumed I was in trouble. Instead, Uncle Ray came home smiling. What? Your science teacher thinks you're going to make his job interesting. I messed up. No. He said I skipped the formulas. He also said you solved every problem correctly. I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever called home because I'd done something well. A month later, Uncle Ray asked me to skip school for one morning. The words immediately made my stomach drop. I'd heard them once before, inside a lawyer's office. He noticed my expression. This isn't like last time. I hadn't realized he'd seen the fear on my face. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. I promise. I believed him. We drove to a brick building downtown. It looked more like a doctor's office than a school. Inside, a woman with silver glasses introduced herself. Hi, Noah. I'm Dr. Elaine Brooks. She smiled gently. I'm going to ask you to solve some puzzles today. Puzzles? And maybe draw a few things? No math test? She chuckled. No. No spelling? No. What if I fail? There isn't a passing score. I looked at Uncle Ray. He nodded. Just be yourself. The evaluation lasted nearly 5 hours. Some parts were easy. Some were frustrating. I built shapes from colored blocks. Solved picture patterns, remembered stories, identified sounds, drew objects from memory, read paragraphs, answered questions. Nobody rushed me. Nobody sighed when I needed extra time. For the first time in my life. I wasn't trying to prove I wasn't stupid. I was simply answering questions. A week later, Uncle Ray picked me up early from school. He looked happier than I'd ever seen him. "Everything okay?" He laughed. "Better than okay." At home, Dr. Brooks was waiting in the living room. She had a thick folder on her lap. She smiled at me. "I have your results." I braced myself. Here it comes. The proof. The official confirmation that my parents had been right all along. Instead, she opened the folder and looked directly at me. "Noah, you are not intellectually delayed." I stared. "You have dyslexia." The word meant nothing to me. She continued. "Your brain processes written language differently. So reading is harder." I nodded slowly. And that's all." "That's all?" She smiled. "That doesn't measure intelligence." I looked confused. She turned another page. In fact, she slid the report across the table. "Your nonverbal reasoning scores are in the 98th percentile." I blinked. "What does that mean?" She looked at Uncle Ray before answering. "It means that out of 100 children your age," she smiled, "only about 2 would score higher than you in visual problem solving." The room went silent. I looked at Uncle Ray. His eyes were wet. He wasn't crying, but he was close. Dr. Brooks continued. "Your brain isn't weak. It's wired differently. You think in pictures. You solve problems spatially. You notice patterns most people miss." I couldn't breathe. For 12 years. I'd believed I was the dumb kid, the slow kid, the mistake. And now, a stranger was calmly telling me that the thing I'd hated most about myself wasn't proof I was broken. It was simply how my brain worked. That night, Uncle Ray made my favorite dinner: cheeseburgers, French fries, chocolate pie from the diner in town. Halfway through dinner, he disappeared into the hallway. When he returned, he placed an envelope beside my plate. "What's this?" I almost mailed it. I opened it. Inside was a copy of Dr. Brooks' report. Folded with it was another letter, addressed to my parents. But it had never been sent. I looked up. "You wrote to them?" "I wanted them to know the truth." "Why didn't you send it?" He looked out the kitchen window. "Because someone beat me to it." "Who?" He slowly reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out another envelope, already opened. "This arrived yesterday." The return address made my heart stop. It was from my father, and written across the front in handwriting. I recognized instantly were 6 words: "Do not tell Noah about this." I stared at the envelope for what felt like an hour. It sat between us on the kitchen table. The fries had gone cold. Scout rested his head on my knee, sensing something had changed. I looked at Uncle Ray. "You." "Already read it?" He nodded once. I had to. "Why?" "Because it was addressed to me." My fingers hovered over the envelope. "What if? I don't want to know." Uncle Ray didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and folded the flap back. "You don't have to read it tonight, but if you do." He looked me in the eyes. "Remember that adults sometimes tell themselves stories to live with their own choices." That sentence wouldn't fully make sense until years later. At the time, I just nodded. I unfolded the letter. My father's handwriting hadn't changed. Every letter looked perfectly straight, just like him. "Ray, I heard Noah was evaluated. If the doctors tell you he has some kind of learning issue, please don't tell him we already knew that was possible." I stopped reading. "What?" Uncle Ray didn't speak. I looked back at the page. Years ago, his school suggested testing. We declined because Karen believed putting a label on him would ruin his future. She insisted he simply needed discipline. Karen. My mother's name. My chest tightened. I kept reading. "Whether we were right or wrong doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. Telling Noah now will only make him hate his mother more than he already does." I swallowed hard. I didn't hate my mother. Not then, mostly. I missed her. The next paragraph was shorter. Only one sentence. Please let him believe we did what we thought was best. I read it again. Then again. Something about it bothered me. Not the words. What they didn't say. There was no apology. No, I'm sorry. No regret. Just let him believe. I folded the letter carefully. That's it? No. Uncle Ray reached across the table. There was something else. He handed me a second page. This one wasn't written by my father. The signature at the bottom read, Karen Whitmore. My mother's handwriting slanted sharply to the right. Ray, you always thought Noah deserved more patience than Derek. Maybe you were right, but families don't survive by pretending every child has the same potential. Someone had to make hard choices. My hands began to shake. I continued reading. Derek has opportunities that require time and money. Noah needed constant attention and still fell behind. We couldn't sacrifice one child's future for another's. The words blurred. I blinked until they came back into focus. She wasn't talking about children. She was talking about investments. One worth keeping. One too expensive to maintain. Then I reached the final paragraph, the one that changed everything. You always loved Noah more than we did. Maybe that's why he belongs with you. I looked up. Uncle Ray's jaw tightened. I've read that sentence 1,000 times. He spoke so quietly I almost missed it. And I still don't understand how a mother writes those words. Neither did I. The room was silent except for the ticking clock above the stove. Finally, I whispered, Did you love me more? He looked offended. No. I frowned. You were simply easier to love. I didn't understand. He leaned forward. There's a difference. How? Love isn't limited. He paused. Some people make it limited. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Everything I'd believed was shifting. For years I'd assumed my parents gave up because I wasn't enough. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe they had given up because they didn't want to do the work. That thought scared me even more, because if it was true, none of it had been my fault. The next morning, I found Uncle Ray in the barn repairing an old wooden workbench. He handed me a hammer. Without saying anything, he pointed to a loose board. We worked for almost 20 minutes in silence. Then he spoke. You know what wood does when it's under pressure? It cracks? Sometimes. He tightened a bolt. Sometimes it bends. He looked at me, and sometimes it becomes stronger than it was before. He tapped the repaired bench. Depends who's holding the tools. I knew he wasn't talking about wood. Life slowly moved forward. School became easier once teachers understood how I learned. I still struggled with reading, but audiobooks changed everything. Speech-to-text software helped. Extra time on tests made a difference. By 8th grade, I was earning A's in science and art. By high school, people stopped introducing me as the kid who transferred. I became Noah. Just Noah. It felt strange, wonderful, and terrifying, because I kept waiting for someone to discover I was still the boy my parents had rejected. One afternoon during my sophomore year, Mr. Patel entered the classroom carrying a stack of brochures. I've nominated someone for the state engineering summer program. The class buzzed with excitement. He smiled. They only accept 20 students. My best friend leaned over. Probably Emily. Or Tyler. They're both geniuses. Mr. Patel looked around the room. Then he said, Noah Whitmore. For a second, nobody moved. I laughed. He wasn't serious. He held out the application. I'm serious. I can't. You can. I'm not. I almost said it. Not smart enough. The words reached my tongue, then stopped, because they no longer felt true. That evening, I filled out the application. Every question made me nervous. Every essay felt impossible. 3 weeks later, a large envelope arrived. Congratulations! I'd been accepted. I ran outside to find Uncle Ray. He was fixing a fence. I held up the letter. He read it, smiled, then hugged me so hard my baseball cap fell into the dirt. I'm proud of you. 3 simple words. I'd waited my entire childhood to hear them. That summer changed my life. For the first time, I met kids who thought like I did. Some had dyslexia, some had ADHD, some were autistic, some simply learned differently. None of them apologized for it. One evening, our instructor gave us a challenge. Build a bridge from scrap materials that could hold 50 pounds. Everyone started calculating, writing equations. Me? I just stared at the pieces. In my head, I could already see the finished bridge. 2 hours later, mine held nearly 200 pounds. The instructor walked around it twice, then asked, "Who taught you structural visualization?" "I don't know what that is," he laughed. "You've been doing it all afternoon." On the final day of camp, he handed me his business card. "If you ever decide to become an engineer," he smiled, "call me." I slipped the card into my wallet. I had no idea that 15 years later, that same man would play a crucial role in exposing the biggest lie my parents had ever told. And by then, they would be the ones standing on my front porch, asking for a second chance. The engineering camp ended 2 weeks before school started. Most of the other kids went back to lives that looked exactly the same. Mine didn't. For the first time since I could remember, I woke up excited instead of anxious, not because I'd suddenly become brilliant, because I had proof that I wasn't who my parents said I was. I kept the instructor's business card in my wallet. Every few days, I'd take it out, read his name, and put it back. Daniel Mercer, PE Senior Structural Engineer. It wasn't just a business card. It was evidence that someone who built bridges for a living thought I might be capable of doing the same someday. Junior year was harder, the classes were tougher, the expectations were higher. I still had dyslexia. That hadn't magically disappeared. Reading assignments took me twice as long as everyone else. I still listened to audiobooks while following the printed text with my finger. I still used colored overlays to keep words from blurring together. Some students whispered, a few laughed. One boy asked loud enough for half the class to hear, "So, can you actually read?" Before I could answer, a girl named Emma closed her textbook. She looked straight at him. "Can you?" He frowned. "What?" "Read." "Obviously." "Then maybe read the room." The class burst into laughter. He never bothered me again. After school, I caught up with Emma in the parking lot. "You didn't have to do that," she shrugged. "My little brother has dyslexia." "You knew?" I noticed. "How?" "You never look at the teacher when they're reading." She smiled. "You watch everyone's faces instead." Nobody had ever noticed that before. "You make pictures in your head." I blinked. "How did you know that?" "My brother does the exact same thing." That night, I told Uncle Ray about Emma. He smiled without looking up from the lasagna he was pulling out of the oven. "Sounds like you made a friend, I guess." He placed the dish on the table. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "The right people usually find each other." A month later, Mr. Patel entered the classroom with another challenge. The school district was sponsoring a bridge design competition. The winning team would receive scholarships and internships with local engineering firms. He wrote one sentence across the whiteboard: "Build something that deserves to stand." Then he looked directly at me. "Noah, I already knew. You want me on the team." "I do. I'm not the best student. I didn't ask for the best student." He smiled. "I asked for the student who sees things before the rest of us." There were 4 of us: Emma, Tyler, Marcus, and me. For 6 weeks, we stayed after school every afternoon. Sometimes until 8 or 9 at night. The others handled calculations. I handled design. Not because I was better, because I could see stress points before we built anything. One evening, Tyler looked at our model. "I don't get it." "What?" "You keep changing tiny pieces." "They're carrying too much weight." He frowned. "How can you tell?" I pointed. "I can almost watch the pressure move." The room went quiet. Marcus laughed. "I swear your brain is weird." Emma smiled. The good kind. Competition day arrived. 23 schools filled the convention center. Rows of bridge models stretched across the room. Some looked like works of art. Others looked impossible. I suddenly felt 12 years old again. Maybe we weren't good enough. Maybe I'd fooled everyone. Mr. Patel must have seen it on my face. He walked over and quietly asked, "What are you thinking? I don't belong here." He folded his arms. "Look around." I did. Every bridge in this room started as an idea. He nodded toward ours. "So did yours." The judges spent nearly 3 hours testing each design. One by one, bridges cracked, collapsed, bent, failed. When they reached ours, I held my breath. 20 pounds. No movement. 50. Still standing. 100. The wood groaned. 150. Nothing. 200. Still standing. The room began to notice. By the time they reached 300 pounds, people from other schools had gathered around. 350. 400. Finally, at 428 pounds. One support beam snapped. The bridge leaned, then settled. It hadn't collapsed. One judge looked at another. "I've never seen anything like this. We won. Not by a little, by almost 200 pounds. The newspaper ran a photo the next morning. 4 smiling teenagers holding a trophy. I stood on the far left, half hidden behind Emma. That didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I was part of something that couldn't be explained away as luck. 3 days later, Uncle Ray came home carrying the newspaper. "I've got something to show you." He wasn't looking at the article. He was looking at the back page, a small local section. There, tucked into the corner, was another photograph. My parents, standing beside Derek. The headline read, "Local student accepted to prestigious pre-med program uncle." Ray laid the paper on the table. Neither of us spoke. Then he pointed to the date. Same day, same newspaper. 2 family stories, less than 10 pages apart. One celebrating the son they'd kept, one celebrating the son they'd given away. I wondered if they'd seen it. I wondered if they recognized my face. Uncle Ray quietly folded the paper. "They haven't called." I nodded. "I know. They probably won't." I nodded again. "I know. The truth hurt less than I expected." Maybe because I'd already stopped waiting, that evening I walked out onto the porch alone. The sunset painted the fields orange. Scout rested beside my chair. For the first time in years, I realized I couldn't remember my mother's voice clearly anymore. It startled me. Some memories fade on their own. Others, you let go of because holding on hurts too much. Just as I stood to go inside, I heard Uncle Ray's truck pulling into the driveway. He'd forgotten his toolbox and gone back into town. He climbed out carrying something I hadn't seen before, a small cardboard box. "It's for you." "What is it?" It came from Tulsa. My stomach tightened. There was no return address. Only my name, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Not my father's, not my mother's, Derek's. My brother had never written to me before. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a single cassette tape. And taped to it was a yellow sticky note. It contained just 5 handwritten words. "You deserve the whole truth." Noah listens to the mysterious cassette tape, expecting a message from Derek, but instead hears a secret conversation recorded 15 years earlier that was never meant for him to hear. I stared at the cassette for a long time. Kids today probably wouldn't recognize one. I did. Uncle Ray still had an old cassette player in the garage. He used it when he worked on furniture because he refused to replace perfectly good equipment. The label on the tape was blank. No date, no title, nothing except the yellow sticky note. "You deserve the whole truth." I looked up at Uncle Ray. "Did Derek send this?" "I don't know." "There wasn't a letter?" He shook his head. "Just the box." Something about it made my stomach tighten. 15 years had passed since I'd seen my brother. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas gift, not even a phone call, and now, a cassette tape. We carried the player into the kitchen. Uncle Ray plugged it into the wall. The old machine buzzed softly. I turned the cassette over in my hands. What if I don't want to hear it? You don't have to. I thought about putting it back in the box, throwing it away, pretending it had never arrived. Instead, I slid it into the player. My finger hovered over the play button. Then, click, static filled the room. For several seconds, there was nothing else, just the hiss of old magnetic tape. Then I heard voices, muffled at first, like someone had left a recorder running in another room. A man's voice, my father. He's asleep. Another voice answered, my mother. Keep your voice down. My chest tightened. The recording wasn't new. It was old. Very old. I heard a television playing faintly in the background, then dishes clinking. They were in our old house. I knew it immediately. Dad sighed. I hate talking about this. Mom answered without hesitation. We don't have a choice. There was a pause. Then my father asked the question that froze me. What if the testing proves Ray right? Silence. My hands began to shake. Mom answered. It won't. You don't know that. I do. Karen. If Noah gets diagnosed. She stopped. The next words came slowly. Everyone will treat him differently. Dad spoke quietly. Maybe that's the point. No. He deserves help. Another long silence. Then my mother's voice hardened. No. If people start making excuses for him, he'll never learn. Dad didn't answer. Mom continued. And Derek will suffer. I frowned. Why would Derek suffer? She answered before I could even think it. Every dollar we spend on Noah is one less dollar for Derek. The room around me disappeared. I heard only the tape. Every dollar. I looked at Uncle Ray. His face had gone pale. Dad spoke again. Ray offered to help pay. I don't want his money. He isn't offering money. What then? He said Noah could stay with him for a while. A while, not forever, just a while. Mom laughed bitterly. You know what'll happen. What? He'll get attached? Dad didn't answer. She continued. And once Ray convinces him we're bad parents. Her voice faded as she walked farther from the recorder. A cabinet door opened, closed. When she came back, she sounded calmer. Maybe that's better. What do you mean? If Noah already prefers Ray. Another pause. Then leaving won't hurt him as much. I couldn't breathe. The tape crackled. Someone picked up the recorder. The sound shifted. Then, a third voice. Small. Nervous. My brother. He couldn't have been more than 14. Dad? Everything went quiet. My father sounded startled. How long have you been standing there? A while. More silence. Then Derek asked, Are you really sending Noah away? Nobody answered. I heard what Mom said. My mother sighed. You weren't supposed to. He's my brother. We know. No, his voice cracked. You don't. I felt tears burning my eyes. This wasn't the Derek I remembered. The perfect son. The favorite. This sounded like a scared kid. I'll help, Dad asked. Help what? I'll get a job. Mom laughed. You're 14. I don't care. I'll tutor people. I'll mow lawns. I'll do something. Another long silence. Then he whispered the sentence that broke me. Please don't make him think I wanted this. I covered my mouth. I'd spent 15 years believing Derek never cared, that he'd watched me leave without saying a word. But here, on this tape. He sounded desperate. The recording continued. Mom spoke softly. Derek, you need to understand. This family has to think about the future. He answered immediately. He is the future. No. Yes. He just learns differently. Nobody spoke. Then, a loud click. The tape stopped. I stared at the cassette player. That's it? Uncle Ray reached forward. There might be more. He flipped the tape over. Side B click, more static. Then footsteps, a door opening, someone breathing heavily, a young voice. Derek again. Only this time. He was alone. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. His voice trembled. I stole Dad's recorder. I don't even know why I'm talking. He sniffled. If you're hearing this, Noah, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried. I swear I tried. I hid your school report because Mom wanted to throw it away. My eyes snapped open. What? I slipped it into your backpack. I hoped you'd find it. The counselor's report, the one Uncle Ray had shown me. Derek had saved it. Not the school. Not Uncle Ray. My brother. I wanted you to know someone believed in you. His breathing shook. I don't know if Mom and Dad will ever forgive me. I don't care. You deserve better than this family. There was another pause, then one final sentence. If we ever meet again. I hope you let me explain. Click. The tape ended. Neither Uncle Ray nor I spoke. The kitchen felt impossibly quiet. Finally, I whispered, I was wrong. He looked at me. I blamed him. You were 12. I hated him. You hated what you believed. Those weren't the same thing. I carefully removed the cassette, placed it back inside the box. Then I noticed something. There was something taped underneath the cardboard insert. A folded envelope. I'd missed it completely. I peeled it free. Inside was a photograph. Not of me, not of Derek, of my mother, standing outside our old house, talking to someone I'd never seen before. A man wearing a dark business suit on the back of... The photo, in Derek's handwriting, were 7 words. Find out who this man was. That single sentence would uncover a secret my parents had buried for 15 years, and it would explain why they had been so determined to convince the world that I was the stupid child. I turned the photograph over 3 more times, hoping I'd missed something. I hadn't. My mother stood in our old driveway, wearing the blue jacket she always saved for church. She looked younger, but her expression was the same serious, guarded, always watching. The man facing her wasn't anyone I recognized. He was probably in his 50s. Gray suit, leather briefcase, silver watch. They weren't smiling. It looked like an argument caught in the middle. What do you think? I asked Uncle Ray. He studied the picture for nearly a minute. I've never seen him before. Derek thought he mattered. He wouldn't have sent this otherwise. I looked at the back again. Find out who this man was. Nothing else. No date. No location. Just those words. For the next few weeks, life returned to normal. At least on the surface. I finished high school. He taught me more than engineering programs. He taught me patience. Kept working weekends with Uncle Ray restoring away things they don't understand, he'd say while sanding an old oak table. Sometimes all they need is someone willing to repair them. I knew he wasn't talking about furniture. One Friday afternoon, the mail arrived with a thick envelope from the University of Missouri. My hands shook before I even opened it. Inside was an acceptance letter. Not only had I been admitted, I'd been offered a scholarship. It wasn't full tuition. But it was enough that, combined with financial aid and my savings, college suddenly became possible. I ran outside. Uncle Ray was repairing a fence post. They said yes. He wiped his hands on his jeans. They'd be fools to say no. I handed him the letter. He read every line slowly, then folded it carefully. I'm proud of you, Noah. Even after hearing those words dozens of times over the years, they never lost their power. College was harder than anything I'd ever done. Not because the work was impossible. Because it demanded every ounce of discipline I had, while other students finished reading assignments in an hour. It took me 3. I learned to listen to textbooks while walking across campus. I recorded lectures, filled notebooks with sketches instead of paragraphs. Some professors understood immediately. Others assumed I wasn't trying. By sophomore year, I stopped worrying about proving them wrong. My grades would do that for me. One afternoon after class, Professor Helen Carter stopped me in the hallway. Do you have a minute? I nodded. She closed her office door. I've been looking at your bridge designs. My stomach tightened. Had I made mistakes? Instead, she spread my drawings across her desk. You don't draw like engineering students. I'm sorry. She laughed. Would you stop apologizing? I smiled awkwardly. You draw like an architect trapped inside an engineer. She pointed to one sketch. You see structures as living systems. I shrugged. I just draw what makes sense. She leaned back. Has anyone ever talked to you about graduate school? I laughed. I haven't even finished college. I'm serious. For a second, I remembered my father's voice. You're not academically gifted. It felt like hearing someone else's memory. During my junior year, I accepted an internship at a structural engineering firm in Kansas City. On my first day, I nearly walked into the wrong conference room. A man stepped out carrying blueprints. He looked familiar. Very familiar. Then I realized why. It was the instructor from engineering camp, Daniel Mercer. He stared at me for a second, then broke into a smile. "Noah? You remembered me?" "Remembered you?" He laughed. "You're the kid who built the bridge that embarrassed every licensed engineer in the room." I laughed too. I got lucky. "No." He shook his head. "You got prepared." Over. The next 3 summers, Daniel became more than a supervisor. He became a mentor. He challenged every assumption I had about myself. Whenever I doubted my abilities, he'd point to my work instead of giving a speech. "Facts beat feelings," he'd say. "If your brain tells you you're a fraud," he'd tap the blueprint. "Make it argue with the evidence." It became one of the rules I lived by. Years passed. I graduated with honors, accepted a full-time position, bought my first used pickup truck, helped Uncle Ray replace the roof on the farmhouse. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, peaceful, earned. The past still visited sometimes, usually late at night, usually in dreams, but it no longer controlled my mornings. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. Daniel walked into my office carrying an old newspaper. "I found something." "What is it?" He laid the paper on my desk. "I've been cleaning out storage. It wasn't even from Missouri. It was an Oklahoma newspaper, dated 15 years earlier, the week after I'd moved away. One article caught my eye. Local. Development company acquires land for new medical plaza. I almost pushed it aside, until Daniel tapped a small photograph beneath the headline. Look at the advisory board. There were 6 people standing together: developers, investors, city officials, and the man from Derek's photograph, the one standing in our driveway with my mother. My pulse quickened. Daniel frowned. "You know him?" "No, but I think he knew my family." Daniel looked at the caption. His name was Richard Halbrook. I whispered it to myself. Richard Halbrook. The name meant nothing. Yet, somehow, it felt like the first piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. Daniel kept reading. He owned several education consulting companies back then. Education. Why would an education consultant be meeting my mother? Before I could ask another question, Daniel's expression changed. "Wait." He leaned closer to the article. "That's strange." "What?" He wasn't just an education consultant. He pointed to the line beneath Halbrook's name. He specialized in educational placement and cognitive assessments. The room suddenly felt smaller. Cognitive assessments. The exact kind of evaluation my parents had refused to let me have. I looked at the old photograph again, then back at the newspaper. One question echoed through my mind. If my parents refused to have me tested, why were they meeting with a man whose entire career revolved around testing children? I had a feeling the answer wasn't buried in the newspaper. It was buried in the 15 years my parents never wanted me to question, and somewhere. Richard Halbrook knew why. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the day. Every blueprint on my desk blurred into the next. My mind kept circling the same question. If my parents refused to have me evaluated, why were they meeting with an educational consultant who specialized in cognitive assessments? Those 2 facts didn't belong together. Unless someone wasn't telling the whole story. That evening, I drove to Uncle Ray's farm. He was sitting on the porch, sanding the arm of an old rocking chair. Scout, slower now with gray around his muzzle, lay asleep at his feet. Uncle Ray looked up the moment he saw my face. "What happened?" I handed him the newspaper. He adjusted his reading glasses. His eyes stopped at the photograph. "I've seen him before." I froze. "You have?" He nodded slowly. "I just couldn't remember where." "When?" "The summer before you came to live with me." I pulled a chair closer. "Tell me everything." Uncle Ray leaned back and closed his eyes. I came to your parents' house one Saturday. Why? Your birthday. I'd forgotten. My 12th birthday had been awkward. Derek had received a telescope. I'd gotten a puzzle. Not because I liked puzzles, because Mom said they might help my brain. I knocked on the front door, Uncle Ray continued. Nobody answered. So I walked around back. He paused. And I saw your mother talking to a man in a gray suit. The same one? I think so. What were they saying? I couldn't hear much. He frowned. But I remember one sentence. He looked directly at me. Your mother said. He took a slow breath. If this report becomes official, everything changes. The words hung between us. What report? I don't know. What changed? I don't know. Why didn't you tell me? He looked down at his hands. Because I didn't know if it mattered. He sighed. And after everything that happened, I was more interested in making sure you survived than solving a mystery. I couldn't blame him. If our positions had been reversed, I would have done the same. The next morning, I called Daniel Mercer. I need a favor. What kind? I need to find records connected to a man named Richard Halbrook. Daniel was quiet for a moment. That's possible? How? He retired years ago. I know. But his company was bought by another consulting firm. You think they kept the files? I don't know. But companies almost never throw away legal records. He smiled. Engineers aren't the only people who keep paperwork forever. 3 days later, Daniel called back. I found something. My heart started racing. What? There are archived client files. Can I see them? Not exactly. Why not? Privacy laws. Of course. My shoulders sank. Then Daniel added, unless... What? You can prove the file belongs to you. A week later, I found myself standing inside a records warehouse outside Oklahoma City. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, thousands of cardboard boxes. A woman named Linda met us at the front desk. She looked through my identification, then through several authorization forms. Finally, she nodded. We found one file. She disappeared into the storage area. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a thin gray folder. Across the tab was one name. Noah. Whitmore's hands actually trembled. This file had existed all along. Someone had created it. Someone had preserved it. Linda placed it on the table. You may review it here. I carefully opened the cover. Inside were only 12 pages. The first few were intake forms. Basic information. Name, date of birth, parents' names. Nothing unusual. Then I reached page 6. A typed evaluation request. Submitted by Karen Whitmore, my mother. I frowned. She had requested the assessment herself. That made no sense. I kept reading. The request described concerns about reading delays, memory, academic performance. Everything seemed normal, until the final page, stamped diagonally across the bottom in red ink. Assessment canceled by parent request canceled, not declined before it began. Canceled. I looked closer. The date caught my attention. The assessment had already been scheduled. My parents hadn't refused the school's recommendation immediately. They had agreed, then changed their minds. Why? I turned the page over. Something had been paper-clipped to the back. A handwritten note, Richard Halbrook's signature, appeared at the bottom. I read the first line, aloud without realizing it. Based on preliminary observation, I strongly recommend completing the evaluation. I have concerns that the child's academic difficulties are masking unusually advanced nonverbal reasoning. My mouth went dry. It was almost identical to what Dr. Brooks had discovered. Later, 15 years earlier, Richard Halbrook had reached the same conclusion. He believed I wasn't intellectually limited. He believed I had exceptional ability. So why was the evaluation canceled? I kept reading, then I reached the final paragraph. Everything inside me stopped. Parent stated they do not wish for extended family to receive knowledge of potential diagnosis or gifted classification. Extended. Family, not school, not neighbors. Extended. Family. Someone didn't want Uncle Ray to know, but why? Linda noticed my expression. Are you all right? I nodded automatically. No, I wasn't. because the story I'd believed. My entire life had just fallen apart. My parents hadn't rejected testing because they feared labels. They had canceled it after an expert suggested I might actually be gifted. They had hidden that possibility deliberately. I closed the folder. There was only one question left, not whether they lied, but why. As Linda reached to take the file back, a single folded sheet slipped from inside the back cover and landed on the table. Nobody had noticed it. Not even her. It wasn't typed, it wasn't official. It was a handwritten memo. Across the top, in blue ink, were 8 words that made my pulse thunder in my ears. Discuss only with Mr. Whitmore. Mother left meeting early. My father, not my mother, Richard Halbrook, had spoken to him alone. Whatever happened next. Father had known the truth years before I ever did, and somehow he had chosen silence.